So we're going to get right into it. First of all, before we do anything too serious and start answering questions, very important checkpoint here. I'm going to make sure we're recording, which we are, and I see some thumbs up already. Hit that little react button at the bottom. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, and see my screen. Let's see, that's a lot of thumbs up. And if you can't hear me, see me, or see my screen, let me know in the chat and we'll get that resolved. And if at any point during our workshop tonight, you can't hear me, see my screen, or something's going on, let me know and we'll get it fixed. Let's see, how's it from Dallas, Texas, Kent State, Tiana from Jersey as well. Nice, Jersey in the house, love it. All right, I saw a lot of thumbs up there and I'm not seeing anything in the chat that anyone can't hear me. I'm gonna try to get closer to the mic here. Awesome, so looks great. Thumbs up all around. Let's do it, let's get started. We're recording and let's get into it. Cool, so let's get started. Tonight is a Q&A workshop on the job challenges in UX research and design, basically an hour where myself and Cola wanna hear your questions, really about anything, UX research, product design, the day-to-day work challenges that you're experiencing, career questions that you have. So we're gonna get into all of that in just a second. My name is Joe Formica. I'm the design advocate at Lyssna. I'm gonna be your host tonight and hopefully for many, many more workshops in the future. I've been a senior product designer and researcher for 10 plus years, and I've been teaching design for just about as long at General Assembly here in New York, through Bite Size UX, my company, which I've taught many classes with Cola with. And in that time, I've worked on projects of all shapes and sizes. As we get into some of the questions and some of the discussions tonight, I'm definitely hoping to bring in some of that experience, some examples, and pull from some of those stories or lessons learned, let's say, over that career. Tonight is a relatively short Q&A workshop, but no matter what we're talking about in this workshop or any going forward, really my goal for everyone here is for you to leave not just feeling like you know a little bit more about, you have more information in your brain, but to actually feel confident to put this stuff into action and to feel better about your day-to-day work and moving forward with it and improving when you go to work or go back to that project or whatever you're working on tomorrow. And Cola, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cola and I am a senior product designer, founder of my own consultancy, and I now consult with companies ranging in size from enterprise to small mom and pops to educational organizations, just really all over the place. I started in UX design before that was a term. When I was in college, I was teaching web for designers. I think UX design wasn't a term yet. And while I was working in digital the whole way through, I didn't really solidify UX for myself until taking Joe's class at General Assembly. Joe was my instructor for my certificate program, and thus began a multi-year mentorship relationship. And I've been very privileged to teach with him at Bite Size and share my own experience from my career working transitionally across brand into user experience design, now founding my own company, and all of the wonderful shenanigans that have happened in between.
Thanks, Cola. Awesome. So here's what we're going to cover tonight. Intro, basically through that, hand-picked questions. So in the form when you registered for this class and through a couple other things I put out there, I asked for, in addition to you being able to ask live questions here tonight and talk about whatever's on your mind, I picked, usually I do a few, but I picked one question that came in beforehand that I wanted to give a little bit more of an in-depth answer, and Cola and I wanted to provide a little more detail on it, thinking that it's a really good question, hopefully helpful for everyone here. So after we finish our quick intro here, we're going to go through one of those questions that came in before the workshop. Then we're going to get right into live Q&A. You'll be able to submit your questions. We're going to go through and get to as many as we can, get you as good answers as we possibly can. and we'll be doing that live and discussing them. So if you see right next to the chat, there's a little questions tab. I'm going to give you time to ask those questions once we get into it. But if you have questions that come up in the meantime, drop them in there, because we're going to have all the questions in there and kind of go through them from the top down. And finally, do a quick wrap up and let you get out of here to enjoy the rest of your night, tell you about a couple of things we got coming after the workshop and some next steps. Real quick, some tips for getting the most out of our workshop. Everything is recorded. We're going to send out the recording, slides, any resources that we go over here tonight. You will have that in your inbox and be able to come back and watch it anytime. So if you do need to get up for a minute, or you miss something, or want to come back and review one of the answers or something that we chatted about, it's recorded and you will have access to that pretty soon after the workshop, maybe tomorrow morning or something, maybe sooner. Keep the chat open and active. Like, as you can see, we already got the chat moving and that questions tab there. I'll give you time to put questions in, but if you have any that come up in the meantime, drop them in there and we'll get to them in just a little bit. Finally, take care of yourself. I'm sure everyone's had a long day of school, work, family, whatever else you have going on. I appreciate you being here and taking an hour out. So while we're going to cover a lot, take care of yourself. If there's anything myself, Cola, Diane can do to make it a better experience, just let us know in the chat. I'm hydrated. I got my water bottle right here. Don't worry. All right, cool. So let's start with a hand-picked question. Like I said, I put a couple feelers out there, both in the registration form for tonight and in a couple other places, to get some questions coming in, before the workshop. And what I usually like to do is go through those and pick one or two of them, tonight just one, that I think is, number one, a really good question, two, something that can be helpful to everybody, or hopefully a lot of you here, even if you didn't ask the question, and three, that I think deserves a little bit more of an in-depth answer and kind of a breakdown than maybe some of the more rapid fire questions we'll be doing in a bit. So this is the question. I paraphrased it a little bit here, but you'll get the idea. I was conducting interviews and I had a participant who kept going off topic / on long tangents. How can I get the interview back on track without being rude? And the person who wrote this question, there was a lot more detail than this and context in it, but you get the idea. You're conducting an interview, talking to a user research participant. You have an idea of where you want that to go, what questions you want to ask, what kinds of topics you want to dig into, and it starts to go in a different direction. Let me know in the chat, first of all, has anyone experienced this before in an interview, usability study, I don't know, anything where you're talking to participants where for one reason or another it starts to get a little bit off track? Yeah, Cola, we've shared plenty of stories on these. Ed, yes.
The things that come out in user interviews are amazing.
Sometimes you think you do it, Ed. Yeah, I probably do it too. Yeah, it's not always, a total train wreck, but if you do enough interviews, you're going to have a few that start to get sidetracked and you start feeling that, maybe anxiety of like, oh, I got 10 minutes left. I got to get to these questions. We're still talking about this. See, Julie said, worst is unmoderated testing when you can't do anything about it. Yes, we're going to talk here about how to do something about it. All right, so many of you have experienced this. I certainly have. And I wanted to use this question tonight because not only is it something that happens a lot, it's kind of, it really feels like a challenge and something that can bring on a lot of anxiety or, stress when you're trying to get that research done and also treat your participant well, make them feel comfortable. So let's look at a quick strategy on how to get interviews back on track. So first of all, the goal when we're conducting interviews, when we're talking to participants, we want those deep, detailed stories, them sharing their experience, them digging back into past experiences they have. We want them to talk and tell us a lot, right? So it's kind of this balance where we want to keep things on track, but we also want to make sure that our participants feel comfortable. We want them to know that they can share. We want them to give us all the details about whatever that experience is that we're asking about. And that's what makes this kind of a challenging and somewhat fragile scenario, making sure that they're staying comfortable and open to share, but still kind of rerouting them back to some of the questions or topics that we want to get on. Let's see. Ed said, "My boss is ruthless." You can. I'll have a form to submit more questions, private form to submit questions later, Ed, if you want to drop it there. All right. So for this question, Cola and I did a little demo, and I'm going to play this for you in just a second. It's only about 2 minutes, but Cola knocked this one out of the park, and you'll see what I'm talking about here.
Like Tiana, I'm a talker.
As an example, yes, I created this scenario where I'm taking on the role of a researcher at Carvana, just pick that as a random company. And I am interviewing Cola, who is my research participant, to learn more about key factors and priorities when shopping for a new car. But things are kind of going off the track here. So let me play this for you, and you can all give Cola a round of applause for her performance in this one. Then we're going to break down some of the techniques in it. So let me pull this link up. Share this step. Now, this might be a little loud. I'm going to put this link in the chat for everyone if you want to check it out. But I know the volume's a little funky on this, so I'm going to play it, but you might want to lower your speakers for a second. All right, so Cola is going to give an epic tangent when I'm trying to get back to talking about priorities and process of buying a car. Everyone ready?
So in our car, for whatever reason, Ben, just like it doesn't matter if I'm trying to pair. Like we get in the car, if his Bluetooth is turned on from his phone because he was listening to his headphones or whatever, the car will just pair with his. Which is extra hilarious because it's literally my car. I'm like, what? It's just like some Pixel versus iPhone thing. I don't really get it, but like it just always pairs with his. And so I'll be like trying to pair and also finding the thing and directions. And we're like turning out of the driveway onto like our busy street in Brooklyn. And it's just like there's so much going on. And he's trying to drive and he's like telling me what to do. And I don't know how to use his phone because I'm an iPhone person and he's got a like Google Pixel or whatever. It's just like way too complicated, like ridiculously complicated. And like sometimes I have to pair my Bluetooth from my phone, like I have to put in like a passcode or something, even though like it's been, I've had this car for 10 years, you know, it's like I have to repair it just because Ben's like dominated.
I hear you. Do you mind if I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
That I've experienced something similar, not quite that bad, but
it's ridiculous.
That sounds really pretty frustrating. I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to jump in, just looking at the clock and just to be respectful of your time and cover everything here. I've still got a couple more questions and some topics that I'd love to get your thoughts on. So with the Bluetooth stuff, I would be happy to make some time if we have it at the end of the interview or afterwards, make myself available to hear more about it. But does that sound good if we just move on to a couple more topics?
Yeah, absolutely. What else you got?
Great. So I would love to hear your experience in the car buying experience, a little bit more specifically about your. All right, I'm going to pause it there. That was kind of the end of it. Everyone was able to see that, hear that. Let's see, do we have a clapping emoji in the React? We got some celebratory ones. So Cole and I did a quick recording of that, and we didn't rehearse, practice, anything like that. And I think in terms of delivering a great tangent, Cola, that was perfect. You put me to the test on that one while you're doing it. It was not a softball one to redirect and get back on track there. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. It definitely caught me off guard a little bit. But to answer the question here, now that you've seen it, here's a simple framework for doing that. And it takes practice. It takes a little confidence and trial and error. But if your interview is going off track, step number one, you want to wait for a natural pause in the conversation. This can be hard to do. This was the hardest part, Cola, and what you challenged me with the most in this example. But you want to wait for that little doorway, even if you really are trying to get in there and ask some more questions. Wait. Remember that you probably have enough time to get to everything. and it will really help everything. Even if it's not the smoothest transition in the world, if you wait till you get to a point where your participant kind of takes a breath, eases up a little bit, and you can jump in like I did and say, hey, Cola, mind if I jump in for a second?
It's that Northeasterner in me can talk real fast.
Two yapping New Yorkers interviewing each other. Step two is you want to acknowledge and show interest in their feedback. So some good ways to do this: echo back what they said, really just being a good active listener, right? Echoing back what they said to confirm that you value their input. No matter what they're talking about, even if it has nothing to do with your research plan or what you're trying to learn, you really want to always make sure that your participant feels comfortable and appreciated for sharing their feedback, whatever the topic is. So a good way to do that is to echo it back. You heard me say something like, hey, Cole, I hear you. First, that sounds really confusing. I've had something, with the Bluetooth in my car that kind of happens. And without going into too much detail, I'm letting Cola know I'm listening to you. I'm not just moving on or like kind of steamrolling into the next topic. You can also suggest revisiting the topic at the end of the interview, or talking at a later time, or following up with email to go on more about a topic.
I would add in too of like show engagement in that topic, interest in that topic, especially if you're going to offer to talk about it again later. They're like, this is really, really interesting. Just some sort of like, I want to talk more. I would love to hear more from you about this, if like, especially if they're passionate about whatever the subject is.
Absolutely. And who knows, you might be doing interviews a couple weeks later, a couple months later, and you need to talk about Bluetooth struggles and frustrations. You're going to know who to call and who's going to want to talk about that, and they're going to be ready to give you that information too. So that's a good point. Step three, gently shifting the conversation back on track, reminding them of time constraints. I like to say something like, hey, just to be respectful of your time, I've got a few more questions, topics I'd love to get to. I even said something like, I have a few more topics and questions that I'd love to get your thoughts on. Really, kind of a subtle way to just emphasize you're interested in their feedback and continuing to hear their opinions, but just gradually shifting it to a different topic. And I think, Cola, your reaction in that was really common and really typical of what happens, where a participant is, if you execute it correctly, they're going to say, yeah, no problem, right? Let's move on. I'm doing an interview. Tell me what you want to talk about, and we'll go from there. So hopefully that was helpful, everybody. I loved this question because it's totally one of those things that you might not learn in a research course or in a book or a YouTube video, but it's something that happens a lot. And when it does, it can be a big challenge. But with a little practice and having kind of a clear set of simple steps to go by, it will really make a huge difference in your confidence in interviewing, and also in what comes out of those interviews, and really being able to get the most out of your questions and the discussions that you're having with your users.
It's important to remember that like you're in charge, like you are the facilitator of the interview, and you're getting the information from the user, whoever you're interviewing. But at the end of the day, it's you who has your notes, your script, and sometimes there are choices to be made about like, oh, this user is like super knowledgeable about this thing that I know is important, and I kind of want to just let them keep going, and I might have to sacrifice some questions that I had in my script, or maybe set up an additional interview with this person, or make sure that I have time set aside at the end to revisit this conversation, right? And be very intentional about that. Like, I really want to hear more about this. I do have a couple more topics I'd like to cover. Can we just run through some other things and then come back to this?
Absolutely. The last thing I'll say about this is you might just have some interviews that you can't get back on track. I can say maybe I've had, 3 or 4 off the top of my head where you just say, you know what, this one, we're going to learn from it. We're going to write some new questions and move on. But if you can go back, check out these slides. If you're doing any types of interviews or moderated usability studies, check this out as a little refresher. Watch Cola's performance again and my attempt to get it back on track. And that will be really, really helpful, because this will come up. And when it does, you'll be ready for it.
pretty
Awesome.
much every time. Like, I don't know if I've had an interview where this hasn't happened.
Excellent, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us through that one. We're going to get into live Q&A right now. So we got about 35 minutes left. We'll do a really quick wrap up right at the end. So I want to use the rest of our time here to hear your questions. So I'm going to give you some time right now to write some questions in. If you go down next to the chat tab over here, let's see, do we have no questions in just yet? I'm going to ask one. Let's just say, what is UX research? Make sure those are going through. And yeah, we can send those in. Awesome. So great. We got a question from Stephen already. So I'm going to give you guys just about 3 minutes on this to drop some questions in if you have them. You can ask about anything. If you have kind of general questions about product design or research, if you have career related questions, if you're a designer kind of doing a little bit of everything, looking to get into doing more research or refining those skills, ask about that. Questions about on-the-job challenges, if you have specific things you're working on, these are my favorite, and I think Cola's favorite types of questions too. If you have specific things that you're working on, challenges that are coming up, struggling to get buy-in or resources for research, you don't have to give us all the details, but a little bit in there, and we'll tackle some of those. If you have questions about Lyssna specifically, drop those in as well, and we'll check them out in a second. Also, if you see a question that someone else asked that you want to hear us answer, there's a little upvote button. I'm going to upvote yours, Ed. You got 2 upvotes on Ed's that you can click. So we'll kind of go from the top down, but drop your questions in if you have them, and I'll give you a minute to read through some of the others and give them a thumbs up if you want to boost them to the top. All right, awesome. I'm going to start a quick timer for a couple minutes here, and I will check back in
while you're
these questions in the meantime.
Putting
what's up, Cole?
Is it Sav or Sav? I'm not sure how that A is supposed to land, but that article you sent is awesome. I was just like taking a quick skim through it. Very much the state of UX right now, and also something that, and I personally, one of my favorite classes that I teach is on resume, and we have a portfolio class that addresses literally exactly this. Like, you got to be well-rounded. It's not just about the pictures anymore. You have to really talk about what your impact is. If you have questions about that, I'd love to talk about that too. So go ahead. But yeah, totally accurate what they're talking about there. Very real.
Awesome. Cool. We got some I'm just scanning through these. We got some really good questions here. I'll give everyone another minute. I know sometimes I got feedback like 2 years ago from someone that was like, hey, you asked us to write questions or something in the chat, and then I was talking while everyone was doing that, and they said that was distracting. And when I got that feedback, I was like, yes, thank you for telling me that, because that would be distracting for me too. So let me pause, give you another minute to drop some questions in, and then we'll start answering them. Right, cool. Give you another 10, 15 seconds. You can keep firing away with questions even as we're answering them, but give you another few seconds to drop those in, and we'll start at the top. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to start right up here with Ed with your question. So let me start a live answer here. Excellent. Okay, so let me read the question out. Can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see the question on your screen? Did it like pop up over the screen? Awesome. Great question from Ed here. How do you go about validating early designs of a product workflow with customers? What does that session look like? Timing, discussion guide, questions. Really curious about the dialogue when showing a design so it's not leading. This is a great question. I'm going to try to give a brief but hopefully helpful answer on this one, because truth is there are a lot of different ways to do that depending on what you're trying to test or what you're trying to validate. But I would say if you're validating early designs of something, you're presenting a prototype that is, not fully functional. You're putting some concepts out there, maybe to test the flow, let's say like an onboarding flow or a checkout flow. I'm going to kind of answer it in that, with that as an example. But there are a couple different methods that you could use. One is being some kind of moderated usability study where you're putting that prototype in front of a participant. In so many terms, you're giving them a task and asking how they would book a flight, how they would check out or add, a bundle deal of items to their cart, whatever that thing is, and observing them, seeing what's working, what's not working, where they run into points of friction with that. I'd say and that's a pretty general answer. There are a lot of more specific things you could tweak within that. But I'd say overall, if you're testing the early design, trying to validate a flow or a certain process or trying to learn about it, some kind of prototype, either moderated or unmoderated study where you are giving a task and observing in some way and getting feedback from it is going to be the most common. And that in terms of time, that could be something that is, it could vary, but I'd say a half hour is a good number to think of with that. The main things that I would advise, Ed, for testing early designs and concepts, number one is keep the scope of the study and what you're asking users to do relatively small. One of the things I've run into a lot, and I've done designs and like led design for a lot of early startups where we were really kind of creating things from scratch, building prototypes that were just totally new and testing them out. One of the things I learned over time was that if you break off too much and are trying to learn too much or have a user go through a bunch of different flows or tasks and get feedback on everything early on in the process, it can be difficult to make sense of that feedback and the results that you got from it. It can be difficult to prioritize what you want to focus on going forward, what things you want to refine, what things you want to change, update, do more research on. So my main tip for that would be some kind of, usability study where you're observing users, keeping the tasks relatively focused, and maybe doing more smaller, more frequent tests rather than asking a user to do, this really long test where they're hitting a bunch of different areas of your product and collecting all kinds of feedback on it. The other tip I would give for early designs and testing them is a line that Cola knows I use all the time. What would you expect to happen? That's something you can ask or put out there to a participant. The reason I love that line is because you can test really bare bones, non-functional designs, prototypes, and still learn a ton from it. If you have a navigation menu that has a bunch of icons in it and there's nothing behind it, they can't click on it, they can't go anywhere, they can't give you feedback on that page, you can still present a question like, hey, what would you expect to see behind that? What would you expect to do next in setting up your profile? And in a lot of ways, this is excellent to, one, remove bias from it, where they're not being presented with anything and giving feedback on it, and really just getting that raw opinion and expectation where they have enough context to give you something that's going to be useful, but not still kind of open, where you're going to be able to collect a lot of really valuable feedback and maybe learn some really interesting things about what people would expect or hope to see in the product. So short answer there is test often, small, focused, moderated studies. Keep them focused on a specific goal and what you're trying to learn. More shorter tests, better than a gigantic one and having too much to digest after it. And using the phrase, what would you expect, can be really valuable to test things that are kind of half baked, but still really get a ton of value and some really interesting insights out of what people's responses to those.
I would add into, I'm trying to like think about your question just from a like one piece at a time. Your first thing, what does a session look like? Assumes that there is a session, right? If you're using a product like Lyssna, you can gather lots of, like, let's say you don't know exactly how you're going to formulate a session, right? You have two versions you want to test, or you have some changes that you've made that you want to test. Something like Lyssna can really help you get started there, or help you gather lots. Like if you don't have a focus group prepared, or you don't have users prepared, you can get lots of data in a really short time. That helps you move super iteratively through your designs, which we advocate for all the time. If there is a session, like, to answer your question super directly, 30 minutes is probably appropriate. That'll give you time to like do a test for 15 minutes and then kind of talk to them about how the test went for 15 minutes. Discussion guide questions, as Joe said, task test, right? Like, what, you know, we're this is a e-commerce product and we want to see how the checkout flow works. Like, can you go shop for sneakers and tell me what's going on, and have them like narrate what it is that they're seeing, what they're expecting to happen, right? I would say that super upfront. Tell me what you would expect to happen. If something doesn't work in this, that's okay. It's beta. It's not your fault. You're not being tested. Just say what you would expect to happen there. And that in particular, if you're putting a UI in front of them, can give you all sorts of very interesting things. Like, they look for filters in odd places, they look
Yeah.
for the cart in odd places. Like, it's neat. So that's like, those are the kinds of, like, what would you, totally what Joe said, what you would expect to happen, and narrate what you're thinking as you go. And if they fall quiet and they're just kind of like clicking on stuff, just gently remind them, hey, what are you thinking about while you're going through this, you know? And then they'll kind of wake up and they'll be like, oh, I was looking for the
Main thing I think Cole and I both agree on, Ed, is you do not need, you can learn a lot from a very, let's say, basic non-functional prototype or designs if you're asking the right question and focusing a study on really kind of honing in on specific areas or processes that you want feedback on. Hope that was helpful. I'm going to give some stuff at the end if you have follow-up questions too, but thank you. Great question, Ed. Let's go on to Julie's question. Okay, Cola, I know, is going to have a lot for this one. Great question. Any interesting ideas for presenting research results to stakeholders with a low attention span? I have a lot of experience in this. I've also probably been on the other side where I'm the low attention span guy. This is a challenge, right? Low attention span or not. You go out and you're doing some kind of research study, usability studies, testing, you have recordings, you have transcripts, you're coming back with a lot, right? In most cases. And then you have this big challenge of, I have a 30-minute meeting with my manager, stakeholder, and in that time, I have to not only synthesize all of this stuff, make sense of it, I have to turn it into something that is, or figure out how this is going, what this is going to lead to, and what the outcomes are going to be here, how this is going to improve our product, right? Not just give us a bunch of feedback, but how is this actually going to be used to make recommendations that are going to create a better experience? And then you have to do that all in a short time frame or a quick slide deck or something like that. So it is a challenge in itself, even if you have, or presenting that to someone who is, interested in the research and interested in the context around things. Most of the time, it's not that. It's very compressed and difficult. It takes a lot of communication skills to get that off properly. My main advice would be, number one, to really focus on the high impact insights from a research study. I remember a project that I worked on for a test prep app. I was doing a lot of testing and a really good amount of research. I'd come back to our weekly meetings and, pretty much it was, hey, Joe, what happened? Like what'd you learn when you put this practice test, that prototype that you created, in front of 15 people? And, I realized pretty early on that while all of that feedback is valuable. We're not trashing it. We're not disregarding it. That when I'm presenting it, it's okay to really focus on the big things, right? What worked really well? What are the things we absolutely want to double down on, or the features that we saw a really positive response from? What were the things that where users really struggled, where they were really confused? Maybe things that had a high impact on business goals. Hey, this is something that came up, and if this is a problem, this could really ruin our conversion rate or how we get new users. So I think part of it is just being okay with the fact that uh, you can kind of act as a filter of the things that are really going to be high impact, of interest, and worth discussing with a stakeholder. That's not to say that you're keeping the other stuff locked away, but if you are presenting, if you run usability studies, you're going to have so much information. It's almost required that you're going to have to, if you want to present that in a way that makes an impact or provokes action and changes and improvements, that you have to prioritize a little bit on the really big things. The other thing I would say here is give your stakeholders really a upfront, like up close and personal view, let's say, of what is going on in the study that you're doing. On that same test prep app that I worked on, I was really pushing to do more research and testing, and wasn't really getting that buy-in. I did some recorded usability studies, and there were a couple participants who really struggled with certain parts of the app, things that we thought were pretty good and pretty straightforward. And when you actually saw, put that prototype in front of a user, we saw that was not the case, right? They were really confused, frustrated, and we could see that it wasn't bringing any value to them, even if they were able to use it. I took those recordings and I clipped them into like a 2-minute video. So for the low attention span thing, that's exactly what I was dealing with. It's like, my stakeholders, if I show this to them, they're not even going to watch the usability. They're not going to watch a 40-minute recording of this. So I made kind of like a highlight or low light reel of some of the positive responses, but also some of those that were just like this, video on Zoom, webcam, screen share of someone struggling to use the product, someone struggling to do things that are the whole value proposition of the product, to create practice tests, to learn what they should be studying next. And that had a huge impact on that project and on the stakeholders I presented it to. And it's something I've done in many projects since, whether that's showing a recording, whether that's pulling up Lyssna results for a study and showing real feedback from people. It's not about showing everything or unloading all of that feedback on your stakeholders to kind of get their attention and investment in the research, but it can make a really big impact. And it's honestly hard to ignore if you're going from, oh yeah, maybe there's some vague challenges that are going on, to actually seeing a live human being not know how to check out on your website. So the more you can do that in a presentation, that's going to, at very least, capture the importance of the research that you're doing and really build that investment in not only doing the research, but addressing that stuff and figuring out solutions to it.
I am the person with the small attention span. My husband has ADHD, and I find myself often being like, get to the point of your story. Or I've worked with some designers who make lots of beautiful options, and I'm like, okay, you've made 20 very gorgeous logos. Please come back to me when you have 5 narrowed down. I just don't I'm not going to sit there and comb through it for you. You need to be decisive. So I would say first, something that I want everyone here to keep in mind, the greatest thing I learned in art school is great artists steal. There are so many fantastic templates for research out in the world right now. Figma has a bunch of them in their Figma community, that if you look them up, there are so many. So try to understand someone else's research, right? Look up a research template and try to read it and understand it and see where it starts to get really gnarly for you, where your own attention span wanders, right? That's going to tell you a lot. Study someone else's research, like presentations. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is when you are physically preparing your presentation, which Ed also asked a question that's in this flavor, think about it like you do with product design, right? It's got to have layers. It's got to tell a story. It's got to kind of move you through things, right? So you have your top hierarchy of the key information that really needs to, like, this is, if they, TLDR, if they get nothing else, they at least get those stats. And then you have a little bit more qualitative information. And then maybe you have the resources linked below that, so that when you share that deck out or you share those resources out, if someone is so moved to then go look at the more detailed stuff, or what is more likely to happen, you say something that is shocking that you've discovered in your research. You're confident that it's true, but it has been contrary to what the company has been operating with up until this point. And then in the meeting, you will be challenged to prove that, right? So making sure that you can easily pull up your resources and say, yes, really, like look at how I did it. I had a client who was doing a development education software program, and he had nothing started, but he had done 15-hour plus long user interviews and had full like transcripts from all of them. And in our first meeting, he was trying to take me through the full transcript of all 15.
That's a long one.
I was like, stop. What did you learn?
Yeah.
Why are we talking? Right? So that's like how I would think about it, like you do with any product. You're creating layers, you're telling a story. What's the thing that you want to make sure they see in their mind later when they're thinking about this interaction, when it pops into their brain? What do you want them to recall? And then going into more detail and having more detail available from that. And yeah, look at other people's. See what's out there. There are terrible ones. And if you're looking at something and you're feeling like this is terrible, then it's terrible. Like, that's okay. Not everybody on the internet is right.
Totally. Including us. Not all the time. Definitely. Thanks, Cola. So I know we got a lot more questions. I'm going to try to do some quick kind of rapid fire ones here, ones that I can answer a little bit more quickly, and then get into some others. Like I said, at the end of this, I'm going to give you guys a link if you want to submit more questions. I am doing, and I'm seeing some of the questions in here. I'm working, and Diane and I are working on videos, upcoming workshops that are going to answer so many of these questions in so much detail. So I'll give you an opportunity if we don't get to yours or don't get to it in as much detail as we would like here tonight. But I do want to hit a few of these because there are some really excellent questions. Let me go to Allison's. Do you have tips for convincing managers to allocate budget for research and testing? I'm slowly advocating for it at my current employer, but it's a challenge because it isn't part of the existing culture or process. Allison, do you have 3 hours to sit on live storm here with me and Cole, and I can walk you through this? So I'm going to tell you about our upcoming workshop at the end of this. Join if you can. If not, watch the recording. But I will, because it's on this exact topic in an enormous amount of detail. But the quick answer that I'll give you for this one is what I just talked about for Julie's question, really getting up close and personal with the impact of research, or a better way to think of it is the impact of not doing research, right? It can be, if it's not part of the culture, if it's not something that's well understood or valued in your organization, which is the case for most companies out there, then one of the most effective ways that you can kind of bring that to light little by little is to bring it to light, is to bring to light what your users are actually doing, and really showing. I think that example of a highlight reel, a video, is a great example of taking something that is kind of a vague, oh yeah, we could probably investigate that, there's probably something we could improve there, into, wow, I am watching a live human being who doesn't know how to buy a product, or struggling to buy a product, and we're putting all this time and money into making it easier to do that and better products. That is something that can have a huge impact on just kind of shifting the value, and kind of like a wake-up call to the value of research. Also, Julie, I just checked the chat. I hope you try putting the highlight reel into action. That will be a good one for your next presentation. Allison, one more. Oh, sorry, I got to answer on this. One more quick tip on getting that buy-in. Start small with the research initiatives that you're presenting. This is why I love Lyssna. This is why I've used Lyssna well before I got brought on as the design advocate, because there are a lot of things that you can run tests on, gather feedback on quickly, effectively, efficiently. They're not 2 months of interviews. They're tests that you can get results back almost immediately on. Starting
24 hours
small.
or less.
Yeah, exactly. Starting small and focused is number one, going to be just easier to get buy-in on, right? It's going to be hard to say, hey, I want to go take a break from all this stuff I'm designing and all these new features and talk to people for 2 months. Instead, start with something small. Maybe that's testing a call to action, certain flow on your site. It's going to be easier to get that buy-in, and it's going to be easier to tie the results or the outcome of that research to real improvement. So it might be like a small start, but it will be really effective in making that connection for your stakeholders in your team. Like, oh yeah, this research thing isn't just going out and talking to people. It actually helps us, create a better product, create more, help our customers be more successful, make more money, achieve our business goals. So starting small and focused, and again, up close and personal with the impact of research or not doing research.
I have 2 thoughts for you, Allison, and then 2 thoughts about clients, or for us as designers. The first one is that you may have guessed, I am a seek forgiveness, not permission type person. And that really applies to research, but we're going to talk about that in just a second because you do have to be a little careful sometimes. And the second is you own your research process, not the company, right? When I teach research, I teach designers that their research process is their own and it is part of their skill set. It's part of their tool belt and they bring it with them from company to company. That is your responsibility, not something that is handed on you or given to you by the client or the organization that you're working with. So that reframe might be enough to help you, but the 2 reasons that clients don't want to do research are because they think that they're so original and they're so proprietary and they don't want anybody to know on their super stealthy thing that they're working on that's going to change the world, right? So ways to get around that are remove all the logos, change the colors, but test whatever it is that the function of the thing that you are testing, right? It's just UI, right? You can just make a whole new one and put that out there and then you can distill the feedback, right? And then the second reason is because they don't understand research. They think it's this big, heady, thing that is going to take a ton of time and have no return on investment, and it's going to stop all production for the time that it's being done. And that's not how I teach approaching it. I mean, some people approach it that way, but that is not how I teach approaching research. Research should be done consistently, iteratively, should be folded into your work. Like, we're not talking about taking an 8-hour day to do research. This is part of the seeking forgiveness. It shouldn't be noticeable that you are doing research other than you are delivering the results, because it's just part of your process. It's a little bit of your day. It's synthesizing feedback you got from Lyssna. It's having a quick chat with a user, a 30-minute chat with a user. There's also a really good, Nielsen Norman Group article about diminishing returns in user testing
we can put together some articles too and include those in the resources too. Cola.
Yeah, the TLDR of that one is 5 user interviews is enough. Particularly once you get past 8, you're just going to be repeating the same subject material over and over, and you're wasting your time. So 5 is really enough. And then do some work, make changes, and then maybe do 5 more. Do some work, make changes, and then do 5 more. So it shouldn't be something that you need to get massive amounts of buy-in. For the proprietary thing and for the sourcing users thing, that can be challenging. So first of all, Lyssna, changing all the info so that it's not traceable. And then also within your organization, you should have subject matter experts. right? People, basically internal users, people who know everything that there is to know. Sales is a good place to look at this, or customer experience, customer support, right? Talk to those folks. PMs for sure are all really good people to interview within your organization, and you can get some good user testing done like within your organization, and no one's going to be mad at you for popping 30 minutes on the calendar with customer experience.
Cola's definitely an ask forgiveness for that, and that's where we get along. All right, we got a couple minutes, like literally 3 minutes. So let me just hit some quick questions here. I'm not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to give you a link to. If you didn't get your question answered, you can copy paste it into the form I'm going to show you at the end, and I'll get to them. Is AI something you're focusing on a lot? I'm going to give a really quick answer to this, but I didn't see who asked it. I think Steven. If you have more details you want to follow up with, I can answer it. Answer is yes, for sure. And I think while this could be a super long discussion, AI is something that almost everyone's focusing on. I think in terms of where I think it's interesting and where I think about AI a lot in terms of specifically research, I find myself thinking a lot and reading a lot of resources about kind of like where like in any case, where it can be most effective. But I think it's really interesting for research because there are certainly things that could be improved with AI in research, but then there's also this whole bucket of methods, skills, processes that really do heavily rely on understanding of nuance, follow-up questions. And I know AI can do all that in a sense, but just thinking of rerouting Cola's Bluetooth rant, that's different than other areas of product design where you're putting stuff on a screen, evaluating it with analytics and numbers, making processes more efficient. So it's definitely something that we're focusing on. I constantly trying to learn and constantly thinking about how that applies to research, which does have this very human aspect of understanding people and their behaviors. But I do think there is a lot of room for both making that more efficient and effective. And I think probably the main area is making the outcomes of that research more clear and direct to improving your product. Okay, I'm going to answer one more here. Let's see. Oh, there's so many good ones. Let's see.
Gonna have to do another one.
Yeah, we'll have plenty more of these Q&As. I'm going to answer Tiana's yours at the bottom. What was my first role in the field? I worked for a startup that had a product for real estate brokers and agents. And I did a little bit of everything. I was like an intern, but I did a lot of customer support of real estate brokers who could not figure out how to get their listings on things. It was a small company. So I was answering the same questions over and over. And then I thought, hey, maybe I can bring this to the guys who are making this platform and say like, hey, I get like 50 calls a day about this. Do you think here's a little sketch I made that maybe will cut down on some of those? I'd be happy to share more about that. But that I thought was a really good intro to product design, where you're basically constantly doing research, constantly getting needs and problems and frustrations and challenges put on me. And even without the skills to really like design something effective, it was a very early introduction to like being able to process that and realize that, hey, we can build things that are going to improve this or have a real impact on the user experience, on things that people actually care about. All right, so I'm going to pause there and do a super quick wrap up here, everybody. Like I said, if I didn't get to your question, there's so many that I want to answer here. Please copy and paste it in the link that I'm going to show you in just a second. Thank you guys so much for joining. Cola, thank you. Diane, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I have taught a ton of workshops and UX and research classes. This is the first one that I've taught in my new role at Lyssna. So I'm happy that we had some people show up here, some amazing questions. I'd be happy to sit here for longer. So thank you, all of you, for dedicating an hour of your evening that you could have been doing just about anything else to come learn, contribute, ask some great questions, and make this a really good hour. Hope it was valuable for all of you as well. If you have more questions, this link here, which we can put in the chat, is a little survey kind of inbox that I'm setting up, because we're going to be doing a lot of these Q&A workshops, doing a lot of videos and answers on so many of the topics that you're asking about here. And I wanted to set this up as kind of my mailbox to get these questions, be able to respond to them, use them for videos, articles, new workshops that we're creating, and really, doing my research and seeing what your challenges are. If you're doing research, if you're a busy designer, what are the things that you want to learn about, that you want to do better? So if you had a question that didn't get answered here, check out that link. I think, let me get back to the chat here. And oops, I'm not in that. And Diane shared that in there. Also, if you, obviously, here at Lyssna talking about research, we like feedback, right? Imagine if I was like, no, I don't want to hear it. Especially since this is our first Q&A event, I would love if you have a second to give some feedback on tonight's workshop. I can promise you, I will be reading through it, looking through what we can improve, what you liked about tonight, and absolutely using that to make better workshops, new events, things that you guys want to learn and how you want to learn them for the future. So this does not just go into an empty abyss. This is something I look at and use and really appreciate your feedback on, especially that this is our first event here. So if you have a second to do some quick feedback, please do, and be much appreciated. Finally, if you liked this workshop tonight, join us again in a few weeks. Diane shared the link to our next workshop, Wednesday, January 22nd. This is the one, Maximizing UX Research on a Budget. If you have questions about faster, more effective, efficient research, not a lot of resources, getting by in so many of the questions that I saw in the chat here tonight, come to this work, sign up for it. Even if you can't make it live, you will get the recording, because I'm deep diving into all of that, and seeing all your questions in the chat here tonight has got me even more excited for it, because we're gonna get into that quite a bit. Awesome. And check out Lyssna. Lyssna is good for all of the things that we're talking about here. Fast, effective research, not needing an enormous amount of time or money or resources. Outcome-oriented, action-oriented, goal-oriented research, things that are actually going to improve your product quickly and help you reach those goals, understand those needs and those problems. Lyssna has a million tools for doing that, especially if you're resource strapped when it comes to research and trying to get a lot done. I know we have a lot of busy designers here. I'm one of them. Cola is one of them. Lyssna is a great tool for you if that's the situation you're in. Thank you so much, everybody. Sorry we went a couple minutes late here, but really appreciate all your great participation, great questions. Cola, you rock. We'll do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would love to come back.
And hopefully everybody, I'll see you in a couple weeks at our next workshop, and we got plenty more on the way. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great night. Keep an eye out for the recording, and everything we'll send out right after this. All right, take it easy, everybody. See you.